Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Close to 4 years after he begrudgingly demitted office, Donald Trump is all set to re-enter the White House. Convicted felon to hold the highest office in the country and the second American to return to power after losing an election. That's not all. In what would further bolster the incoming Trump administration, the Republicans gained control of the Senate and look set to keep control of the House of Representatives as well. The big question we're asking today is, will Trump 2.0 be a better friend to India than what a Harris administration would have been? What role would Indian-American congressmen play in boosting ties between the two nations? It has 6 Indian-Americans, all winners on a Democrat ticket. Among them were sitting representatives who have been re-elected. The 6th Indian-American in the United States is a debutant, and he joins me on the program now. Suhas Subramanyam of the Democratic Party won the congressional race from Virginia. He's the first Indian-American representative elect from the state. A 38-year-old lawyer, Suhas is one of the shining exponents of the American dream. His mother, a native of Bengaluru, immigrated to the United States in 1979 to unite with his father, who grew up in Chennai and Secunderabad. Suhas, after acquiring a law degree, worked as a White House technology policy advisor to former President Obama. His real tryst with politics began when he was elected to the Virginia General Assembly. 5 years later, Suhas is a congressman-elect and a part of what is referred to as the Samosa Caucus in the US. The tagline of his campaign was "Tough fights, real results." Suhas, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being with us on Global Eye, and many congratulations on that hard-fought victory. Who would you like to thank for this victory, first of all?
First of all, thank you. I'm very, very excited to be elected. I know it was a bittersweet night for a lot of Democrats since Kamala Harris lost, but there were so many volunteers, there's so many amazing team members on my staff, and so many people who helped contribute to my campaign or knock doors for my campaign to help make this happen. And so something like this doesn't happen, history doesn't happen unless there are many, many people involved. And it starts with my parents, as you mentioned, who grew up in India, and my whole family, my wife Miranda and her kids. So a lot of people to thank, and a really special night on Tuesday night.
If I were to ask you a little bit more about your journey, we did refer to it in the introduction, but give us a sense of whether your parents, you had some challenges when you came to America, when you grew up in America, and just your rise in American politics.
Yeah, when my mother came, she actually came through Dulles Airport, which I'm going to be representing in Congress, in about 1979, and she told me her first year, she cried almost every night because she was homesick. She missed India. There were people here in America, and my dad was here as well, who welcomed them and who made them feel at home. And that was really important. And so she was able to make it through those first couple of years. And my political journey really came from the fact that, yes, we were just trying to make it as a family, make ends meet, but then they also imparted the importance of service as well. And so I grew up helping at shelters and any way I can in the community to those who are less fortunate. And then when I got to college, I became more political because I was going to school in New Orleans at the time when Hurricane Katrina hit the city. And so I started getting even more involved in public service, and that got me to get more involved. I worked on Capitol Hill and in the Obama White House, but now I'm in Congress, and it's been exciting and a long journey.
Right. So it's not been a great week for Democrats. What do you think went wrong with the Kamala Harris campaign? When did you start feeling that we're losing this?
Yeah, the analogy I would try to make is, let's say you have a star cricket player and they're not playing very well and you're losing by a lot, and you try to put in another batsman or something. It's a lot to ask to have the backup come and save everything and save the day. She only had 100 days left. President Biden's health was declining, and it was a tough situation. People were mad about inflation and the economy. I kept hearing that when I was talking to voters, many of whom voted for Trump, but voted for me. And so I think, there was a lot happening. I think, a lot of the policies that were passed over the past few years will actually the next president will actually get credit for them, because there are things like infrastructure which take time to build and take time to actually contribute back to the economy and to people. And so I'll just say though that no matter who's president, if it's Donald Trump, I'll work with them and I'll make sure that my community's priorities are at the forefront, and that we protect our economy here in Virginia.
But Suhas, do you also feel that if Kamala Harris had been given the ticket, if she had been nominated much earlier, rather than Biden beginning his campaign for re-election, if it was Kamala Harris, the Democrats would have had better chances?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. I think it would have given her more time to be able to run the campaign she wanted to run. But it's hard to answer to that. What I do know is that she and Biden did everything they could for this community. They inherited a pandemic that was very difficult for the entire world, and it took a long time. And a lot of the inflation that we faced, yes, it was from spending, but it was spending to come out of that recession, really, that was brought on by the pandemic. And it was also the supply chain disruptions from that pandemic times the price in some places than they were in 2020 before the pandemic. So it was a very tough situation to come into. And I think, I was reading something today about how incumbents all across the world are really losing because voters are angry across the world about it. And so it's, we'll see. In the end, to me, what matters most is the community and our country and our world, and just making sure that we pass good policies. And I'll work with Democrats and Republicans to get that done.
It was always supposed to be close, but the fact that Donald Trump won all the swing states, the House of Representatives and the Senate, what does this show about the mood of the American voter, and what is the top priority for the average American citizen right now, as per the result of this election, according to you?
Again, I would just go back to the economy. That was really what was on people's minds, and that's what people voted on. And I think historically people vote based on their pocketbook. And so while there are other issues where, they probably admitted that, maybe Kamala Harris, would be, less scandal prone and maybe a more safe choice, they were concerned about the economy and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for president and vice president. And they decided that, they wanted to see if Donald Trump could be a part of a new economic, a process. But I think in the end, I look at the prognosticating, and I look at, and there's more results to be analyzed. I just think that people really care about just making sure we have people delivering for them. And so, Donald Trump now has the Senate and possibly the House as well. There's more votes to count, more seats to call. But, if that's the case, then, he's got the ability to make changes, and we'll see what kind of changes he's going to make. I'm going to be in wait and see mode. Certainly, as one member of Congress, I'm going to do everything I can for my community and for our country, and I'll work with anyone to make that happen.
What's your recommendation for better India-US ties going forward? As somebody who's worked very closely with Barack Obama, you have been a politician at different levels of the US administration. Give us a sense of what would be your recipe of greater success for India and US?
Sure. I think the economic ties are undeniable. And I think a strong US-India relationship is great for both countries, as well as having these two democracies work hand in hand. And so I start with, economic ties. I think I want to make sure that we don't put any policies in place that would prevent the US and India from working together on a number of economic fronts, especially on the technology front, on the innovation front. Indian company offices in the US, opening US company offices in India. It's just a great match. And then I'd like to see more defense cooperation as well. I know, some of that is starting to happen, but I'd like to see, looking into more like, arms deals between the two countries, looking more into how the two countries can cooperate diplomatically as we look into, the next 10, 20 years of the Asian continent, and for all the regardless of whether it's Trump or whether it was Kamala Harris, both administrations, I think, would have been very strong on the U.S.-India relationship, and I look forward to Trump's, ability
Any
to.
concerns, Suhas, on how India is approaching the relationship with US? Any policy to you when it comes to India?
Obviously, the U.S. right now is involved in trying to protect Ukraine from Russia, and I know India has a long-standing relationship with Russia, so that is concerning. At the same time, I wouldn't want that to be an impediment in the U.S.-India relationship. Sure that we're continuing to grow the economic ties, especially, and that we're starting to discuss defense cooperation long term. So I'd say there are a few concerns, but no partner is perfect. But in the end, I think it's going to be a very important relationship, and we have to continue to grow it and nurture it.
Right. Finally, any advice to India and Prime Minister Modi on how to deal with Trump?
Whether it's Trump or someone else, just know that the U.S. Is committed to the India relationship, and that folks like me in Congress are here to help strengthen those ties between the U.S. and India, and really diplomatically across the world. I'd like to see us as a country spending more on diplomatic relationships and economic relationships than on wars, really. So hopefully long term, this can be the start of a stronger U.S.-India relationship. But I'm optimistic for the future.
All right. Thank you very much. And one question coming from my colleague Abhishek. Do you speak Hindi? Any message in Hindi for your viewers in India, those of us watching you?
I don't speak Hindi. My family's from Tamil Nadu, so I wasn't taught Hindi growing up.
All right. You can leave a message in Tamil if you like.
I'll stick with English for now. Thank you, though.
All right. Thanks, Suhas. Thank you very much for joining us on the program, and hope to have you again on CNBC TV18. On the other side, Donald Trump's return to the White House as America's 47th president is set to disrupt the world order yet again. How will this impact America's relationship with China? A special discussion when we return.
The last month, they sold close to $11 billion. That's even more than what they sold in the COVID month. The COVID month, it was around $8 billion or thereabouts. That was in March 2020. And who's offset all this FI selling? Well, you, the DIs. Indirectly, you have played a role out there because the DIs have pumped in close to around $12 billion. But what is this FPI selling? Is it just India? It is other nations as well, like Korea,
Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. Donald Trump's return to the White House as America's 47th president is set to disrupt the world order yet again. The incoming president's threat of tariff imposition has the America's trade partners already bracing for impact. During his first term in office, Trump hit Chinese goods with tariffs as much as 25%. This forced Beijing to negotiate with America and buy an extra $200 billion worth of American goods. This time around, Trump has promised a 60% tariff on Chinese imports. This shave off half of China's projected economic growth. So how is China preparing for Trump's second stint as president of the United States? Joining us now to discuss that and more is Andrew Leong, independent China strategist and chairman and CEO of the Andrew Leong International Consultants. We're also joined by Dov Zakheim, a senior advisor at Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Andrew, let me begin by asking you, Xi Jinping has advised Donald Trump to manage differences properly. But is China now preparing for another round of trade wars with the United States?
Well, first of all, China and of course Beijing and President Xi himself has been preparing for this for quite some time, even before the election results or before this very sense that the Beijing sees that, of course, that there is an existential conflict between the two countries, and the United States is viewing China as this existential threat. And so China has been preparing for it for maybe over the past couple of years in terms of a greater emphasis on self-reliance on technology. Secondly, and shifting the economy, China's economy, more towards internal consumption and also services as opposed to exports. And thirdly, targeting markets or expanding markets in the global south. And don't forget the global south and even the BRICS countries is bigger than the G7. And of course, China is connected to much more connected to the rest of the world compared with the United States. And China, after all, is the largest trading partner to 128 countries around the world, compared with the United States. And so China is doubling down on this. There is no doubt that the Trump administration is going to change a lot of things around the world in its relationships with China, its relationship with the rest of the world, with the global order. And don't forget that this is an administration very powerful, perhaps the most powerful since President Roosevelt, because as you pointed out, he's already controlled both the Senate and the House. And of course, even in the Supreme Court, he has already stacked the Supreme Court with Republican-friendly judges for life. And of course, it's going to revamp the whole federal bureaucracy, vetting all civil servants for their loyalty, their other merits and so you would see that he has all the powers he needs to pursue his agenda. And then, of course, Trump is very different from other presidents.
Andrew?
He is,
Yeah, Andrew, I'm just going to get a comment from our other panelist, Dov. Dov, what's your sense? Do you think, and as we've been reading reports, that imposing tariffs of 60% could actually hurt the US economy and probably cause higher inflation as well? Do you think Trump would be rightly advised to go ahead with his plan of imposing tariffs as high as 60% on Chinese imports?
I think it very much depends, and thank you for having me. It depends on a couple of things. First, will he impose tariffs on other countries? Will that happen? If it does, then it's definitely going to cause inflation and significant inflation. But he may not do that. Give you a good example of that. The Vietnamese are worried about his imposing sanctions on Vietnamese products. Vietnam has had quite a bit of friction with China in the South China Sea and is increasingly seen as a friend of the United States. Does it make sense to impose sanctions on Vietnam? Does it make sense to impose sanctions on America's allies if we want them to join us in dealing with, for example, freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. So that's issue number one. A second issue is, to what extent can the United States substitute for what China's producing? China is very much entrenched in our supply chain, and it won't be easy to get out from under that in the short term, but it is possible. And you have to remember as well, Donald Trump remembers when he believes he's been double-crossed. And as was mentioned, I think, as you mentioned, there was a deal that China would buy $200 billion worth of American products. That hasn't happened. Intellectual property continues to be stolen. Trump believes, and many Republicans believe, that China was responsible for the COVID epidemic. China denies that, but that doesn't change Trump's mind. So he may well go ahead with these tariffs unless China's ready to negotiate and to stick by what they promise.
Right. Okay. Sense as to Xi Jinping, what would he be expecting from Donald Trump, the new president of the United States? One thing that also comes to our mind, that things have also changed from 2016 onwards. There is a slowdown that the Chinese economy has also faced. There is a sentiment to move manufacturing away from China. In this context, how would Xi Jinping realistically like to approach Donald Trump?
Well, I think that Trump being Trump, his tends to be very transactional. And his views of allies are very different from the Biden administration. And even looking at the Ukraine war, he's already declared more than once he's going to end the war in one day. And he doesn't believe in American spending his blood and fortune in Europe. And of course, there is a realist kind of mentality or advice that the United States should concentrate and move away from Europe to concentrate on China. And so I think that he's likely to end the war in Ukraine sooner than people think. That means that Russia is likely to retain a lot of its occupied territories, even though they are not its sovereignty is not formally recognized, using perhaps a Korean War armistice formula. But that would have a tremendous impact. Disruptions on a lot of commodities would be eased, and then the trade flows will become easier. But on the other hand, I agree that definitely it's going to impose 60% tariffs on China, and indeed a higher tariffs on other countries, because he does believe that tariffs is a beautiful weapon. And he even touted tariffs as a substitute for income tax. So I think that you got to believe that that Trump is very, very different. As for allies and as for and even on Taiwan, I mean, he doesn't believe that that the United States would defend Taiwan, without getting economic returns from it. So I think that he's very transactional, and the same applies to his relationship with allies, whether with NATO, Europe, or for that matter, India. Of course, India is a very, very good friend of the United States, and I think that the relationship would continue. But I don't think that he's going to put all the bets on India or on the allies, and then he's concentrating on what benefits are going to any relationship or any kind of action is going to bring back to the United States.
Dov, my final question to you. For the last 2 years, there has been a concern in the US that Taiwan could be the next front after Ukraine. How seriously would Trump follow on this threat? And do you think that any kind of harsh tariff regime by Donald Trump could lead to a Chinese offensive in Taiwan?
Well, regarding Taiwan, you've got to remember that there are a lot of Trump supporters, people who are very close to him, who feel very strongly about defending Taiwan. If you look at the Congress, it's one of the very few issues that unite Democrats and Republicans, not like Ukraine, where there really is a difference there, even within the Republican Party. So that's number one. Number two, I agree that Trump is transactional, but he's not transactional when it comes to China. Let's be clear about that. He's not changed his mind at all about China. No matter how much he's actually said nice things about Xi Jinping, but that hasn't changed his attitude to tariffs or to China generally. So if you combine those two factors, the fact that he doesn't really see China as anything like a friend or even a neutral, and sees it as a threat, and the fact that many in his party, including some of his leading advisors, do believe that that Taiwan needs to be defended. And in fact, many of those who say that the United States should ease up on Europe, let the Europeans defend themselves, let Ukraine worry about itself, they believe that the reason for doing that is that China is the threat and a threat to Taiwan. Now, obviously, that Trump will want something back from the Taiwanese, but it'll be a lot easier for the Taiwanese to accommodate him than I think China could. So I do believe that if the Chinese are stupid enough, quite frankly, to try anything against Taiwan, they will be making a huge mistake.
Right. Thank you very much, Dov, and Andrew, for joining us on the program. Important times ahead. There will be a period of uncertainty till the presidential transition is complete, and let's see how things move on after that. With that, it's a wrap of this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.